Good evening. Welcome. I'm Jerry Westby, and on behalf of the Conejo Open Space Foundation, I want to welcome you to what I think is going to be a very interesting evening. This is our first speaker series event of the year. We plan to have 3 more, and it's our 3rd virtual presentation, so we pretty much got the hang of this, I'm hoping. Tonight, we're really privileged to welcome Beth Pratt for what should be a very, very fascinating and timely presentation. Beth will be talking about the wildlife corridor bridge that will span the 101 freeway at Liberty Canyon, and also about the value of connecting wildlife populations and an update on the progress on building this massive structure. It's going to be the most sophisticated wildlife corridor bridge of its type in the country, so I think it'll be very interesting to learn more. Many of you have seen the pre-event publicity we've put out, but Beth is the regional executive director for the National Wildlife Federation and has dedicated her life to environmental matters. And she's also been the driving force behind the Save LA Cougars campaign. So she's been working very closely with Caltrans on the plans for the bridge, which we'll learn more about tonight. Before we go too much further, I want to thank everyone who has made a donation after you registered. It's much appreciated. Last year, COSF, as we're known by our acronym, pledged $10,000 for the campaign to help support the building of the bridge, and we want to provide some more financial support. So every dollar that we've received in donations for this event is going to go to the campaign. If any of you want to donate after the evening, that would be appreciated. Also want to thank our many longtime supporters and volunteers who are in attendance tonight. We think we're using our money wisely. That's the plan, of course. As an example, yesterday, we informed 2 local students that they will be receiving $1,000 scholarships to start college next fall and pursue an environmental science or related major. This is going to be a renewing scholarship, so they'll get $1,000 each year if they meet certain requirements like continuing the major, full-time students at 3.0 grade point average, etc. This is going to be an annual scholarship, and we hope it's just going to give back and help to provide to the education of the future generation who are going to be involved with protecting the environment and developing environmental policies. A brief few words about the webinar format tonight. Besides Beth and myself, Brendan Callahan, another COSF board member, is going to lend a hand in case we run into any technical difficulties. The presentation is going to be about 45 to 50 minutes, and we'll have 15 to 20 minutes afterwards for questions and answers. All attendees are going to be muted, but we really encourage you to use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen to type in questions. And then after Beth has finished the presentation, Brendan and I will be sorting through questions and providing her with them, and we'll answer them as time allows. And lastly, we're going to be recording the event. So if any of you have to cut out early, you can see the full presentation on the COSF website. It'll most likely be posted this weekend. So sit yourself down, get settled for a really interesting evening. And without further ado, let's get on with the show. Beth, take it away.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Brendan. And first, I just want to start off with a thank you to you both and to your organization. You were there at that first rally in 2014, where we sort of kicked off at least the public side of we're going for it with the Save LA Cougars campaign and trying to make this a reality and get it to the finish line. So thanks for always being there for supporting this campaign and to get this crossing built. The work you do is really important, and as we know, open space needs to be connected, and this crossing is going to do that. And thanks to everybody who's in attendance tonight. I know a lot of you I can't see faces, but I'm sure there are some familiar faces and friends. Obviously, I have not been in LA. Used to be down there weekly. It was my second home, but the pandemic has significantly limited travel. So I miss being down there so much, and hopefully that will resume soon once we all get vaccinated. But obviously, where I actually live outside Yosemite is no hardship to spend stay at home either. It's actually been a little nice not having to travel so much, but I'm starting to miss it. But tonight, I'm going to talk about the wildlife crossing and connectivity in the mountain lions. And for those of you who have been following this, you know it's been a journey, and it's an exciting journey, because when I first started this journey, it was sort of like, we have this thing that we think we need to do, but we don't know what it is, and there was no money. And, you know, we're now approaching having blueprints produced, and the home stretch to actually breaking ground in November, and I'll talk about that. And I just want to thank again both you, Jerry and Brendan, and your organization, all of you out there who have been a part of that. It takes a village, and it certainly did to get this to the finish, getting this to the finish line. So I'm going to talk a little bit about connectivity, why it's important, the mountain lions, which we know, and also then get into the status update on Liberty Canyon. I know we have about 15-20 minutes for questions. If I don't get to them, I'm going to give you my email address. You know, if we run out of time, I will answer every question you have via email as well if we run out of time for those. So let's talk, if I can make my technology work. There we go. I just like to show this picture because it's the two sides of me. And I think what is most interesting to me is most of my career has been spent working in national parks. I've worked in Yellowstone National Park. I worked in Yosemite for almost a decade, and my home is right outside Yosemite. Yosemite is my favorite place on earth, and it's sort of my North Star. But equally important to me is LA, which if you had told me that 10 years ago, I probably would have laughed hysterically at you. But it really was P22, which was quite a game changer and really made me change, you know, my life focus, which went from, you know, wildlife in these really protected areas to urban wildlife conservation, which I think is the future. And it has to be, both scientifically, we now see the need for it, and I would argue socially. And just, you know, this is, for those of you who see me in LA, this is my other home. And this is when I'm not advocating for mountain lions in LA. This is where I try to spend time. And we have a vast array of wildlife up here that I like to study or just hang out with. That's a Yosemite toad. I've really been getting into butterflies lately and surveying alpine butterflies as they fly. And then pika. If I have another favorite wildlife, although this changes daily, I love pika. But as most of you who are watching this, I think, know me as, you know, the cougar lady, and the one who, you know, carries around the cutout of P22 and leads with a team this campaign to get the wildlife crossing built. And to me, wildlife, you know, we were always taught that wildlife in, you know, Yosemite somehow has a more premium than something you'd see in an urban area. But I think breaking down those myths is part of my work, not just getting the wildlife crossing built. That wildlife needs urban spaces, and we need wildlife in our urban spaces. But let's just cut to the chase. I mean, you know, this is what we are working to protect with the wildlife crossing, and this is what is important to all of us. It's kittens like these, and this is some of the newest ones in the National Park Service study, have a future in our urban areas. And what I love is, you know, California and Angelinos and people in the LA area like you have squarely come down on mountain lions and native wildlife side, that you want them there. But that's not the case everywhere. You know, my group is a national organization, and you know, it's not as, you know, we have I call it the California Wildlife Value System, which puts a premium, whether it be government policy or how people day to day like wildlife, that puts a premium on keeping wildlife here, and that wildlife can be in our spaces. It's not everybody, but it's the majority here. But most other people, it's a lot. Wildlife has to be like this and not like this, that we shouldn't see wildlife in our human spaces. And I think that's the thing we need to start challenging. Scientifically, we need to start challenging. I mean, there's a whole social angle I'll get to, but what we now know from the science is that, you know, just limiting wildlife to protected islands of space doesn't work. When I was coming up in my biology field in conservation, which God, now is 30 years ago, it's a little hard to contemplate that 30 years ago I was in college. That was the dominant view. You put the wildlife here in a Yosemite or a wildlife refuge, and you put the people here, and the two stay separate, and voila, we're done. We know it doesn't work now. We know even in the best protected places on the planet, like Yosemite, some wildlife species still struggle. And that's because what we now know is wildlife and plants, but ecosystems to be sustainable need large landscape connectivity. And it's not just animals that migrate, and I'll get into that. So you see, California has a lot of protected space, right? I think I've heard it's over 40% is federal, and then you add in everything else. So it's not that we have a shortage of open space here or a shortage of open space in the Santa Monica Mountains. I mean, Santa Monica Mountains has an abundance of open space. It's just that it's not connected. So Mary Ellen Hannibal, the first book that really introduced me to this and started changing my thinking, I was working in Yellowstone at the time. And if you haven't read this book, it's incredible. It talks about the pronghorn migration route, which, is 1,000+ years, and then how, of course, our human intrusions started messing with that. And I'll show a photo of the wildlife crossing I went to visit that actually worked to reconnect this. But what we're seeing is that wildlife, large and small, we have our mountain lions, and that's P23 for those of you who follow the cats. Sadly, she did get killed on Mulholland, I think it was, or it wasn't a freeway, it was a road. Sadly, the roads took her out too, and she was a pretty incredible cat. But it's not just what I try to get people to think of. Roadkill is one thing that happens and one thing we want to fix. And a lot of wildlife crossings across the world try to fix that. The Utah one, which I'll talk a little bit about, but what we saw a viral video of, they were trying to address Slaughter Alley. They were getting animals hit here and there. What's unique about Liberty Canyon is we actually don't get a lot of animals hit right in that area. It's not that they aren't hit, but not as many as you'd think, because they don't even try. They turn around and come back. And we know that from, 100,000+ GPS points from the National Park Service study. So what we're seeing in Liberty Canyon is sort of secondary effects as well, which is, that they're avoiding it. And then you get what's happening is the genetic collapse. There's not too many other, I can't find any, but I'm sure there's one out there I haven't yet uncovered. Our wildlife crossing is unique because we are trying to save the extinction of a species and reconnect an ecosystem to make it more resilient. A lot of these other wildlife crossings, I would argue, and ones I've been to, that, if you took out, one of the crossings like in Colorado, I'll show, you're still going to get a lot of deer hit, which you don't want to happen, but you're probably not talking as immediate an extinction horizon like we have with our mountain lions, if any. It's just, you're just going to have to deal with roadkill. So that's what makes Liberty a little different. And also what you have here is our roads also have, effects beyond just the immediate animal getting hit, which is the physical, I love the stat, the physical footprint of roads sort of is one thing, but what their effects go out to is extend to a roughly 20% or 1/5 of our lands. And that gets into like avoidance and animals not even coming close, things like that. So I think it's important to think about all the impacts. But of course, we're talking car crashes. There's a human safety element. There's an animal safety element that I don't want to underplay. And in fact, it's something that, I can't handle seeing roadkill. And in a lot of areas, it's a much bigger deal. I mean, Fraser Schilling at the UC Davis Road Ecology Center has put together report after report. The 101 indeed is in that area a hotspot, as well as other places in the state. So it's, there's just so many things that these wildlife crossings solve, I guess is what I'm getting at. And every site might be a little different. And here, the animals are trying. I think that's what I love is, they're trying to adapt. It's usually us who can't get over ourselves and say they shouldn't be there, right? Or how are we going to fix this? I love this video because it shows, the deer were willing to cross the Golden Gate Bridge, right? And what was such a beautiful moment here, and I actually watched this, I think this was 2013, 24, I can't remember now, but this like was going all over Twitter. People were live broadcasting it. And this was rush hour in San Francisco. And I love that these people slowed down and let the deer pass. But as we know, we can't rely on that. And especially the 101, people aren't slowing down and letting the mountain lions or any other animals cross. And I'd like to get back to that, the same, it's not just for the big stuff, the little guys. And I don't know if it's hard to see on your screen, but that arrow is pointing to a western fence lizard. This is Mulholland. And I did help that guy back to safety, but they're trying to find a way too. It's not just the big megafauna. This is impacting all wildlife. And then I also, even though it's not directly applicable to Liberty, but when we start thinking of corridors and wildlife movement and how we do need to intervene as humans or preserve those, there's things you might not think about. This, if you have not seen this short film, Google it, Tadpoles. It's called The Big Little Migration. It's about a 15-minute film. It is worth your time. It shows how these tadpoles migrate back and forth across a pond and how human disruption can really change that. This guy went underwater, and it's just such a beautiful documentary. And that's what I ask people to start doing is think about landscapes, think about your yard, think about roads, everything through an animal's eye. And it becomes life-changing, and it really shows you the challenges that all wildlife face, whether it be tadpoles or mountain lions, in navigating our landscape. This is a trail near me that I've been a big, fierce advocate for. There's been a big uptick in recreational use, like a lot of areas. I know you experienced it in a lot of areas in the Santa Monica Mountains area. And we were getting more newts dying this year. That is actually a newt that was just run over by a bike. So I put up a sign, slow down for newts. But, even our trails, we don't think of them as too harmful. They can be. It's not that we shouldn't have trails, but we have to sort of look at trail planning in the context of what is it displacing, and how can we look at mitigating for that? Because, even sometimes of years, a trail that we might think is harmless actually may be really disruptive. Again, not just to the immediate death, but animals may then avoid that area. I think the biggest example these days that breaks my heart, and I'm actually going to be visiting the border wall soon, is the border wall. This was devastating devastating to people, of course, absolutely, but to wildlife as well, who are used to these migration or just travel patterns. It's been heartbreaking. And I know groups like the Center for Biological Diversity and more are really working on reversing some of it, but they're not going to be able to reverse a lot of the damage down there, which is really sad. And then one thing, this just came up and I thought it was worth showing. This is really cool. We don't tend to think of animals in the water as needing corridors. Where's my mouse? But this was recently released. It's a whale trying to avoid ships. So that blue dot is the whale bouncing back and forth, much like our mountain lions do, back and forth against the freeways, trying to feed. And, even on our oceans, even on our waterways, there are corridors that these animals use that we really have to be sensitive to. Come on, advance here. And this is a video that just came out that I really thought it shows some of the different wildlife corridors. Again, we tend to think megafauna, but I don't know if I'm gonna be able to play it. Let's see. Yeah, I might not have enough bandwidth for this one, so we might skip it. I can send a link. But here are some examples of wildlife corridors that you're seeing here, or wildlife crossings. This is one in the Netherlands. Wildlife crossings are nothing new, especially overseas. They've been definitely, years and years, decades. So that's really good news for us because we have a lot of science and a lot of research that can inform Liberty Canyon and others. But the U.S. is catching up, which is quite exciting. And I'm sure many of you, and you put in the chat if you have, probably the wildlife crossings some of you are most exposed to are the ones on this continent, which is Banff. And we have some of the engineers and biologists and those who worked on BAMF advising on ours as well. But there are a series of crossings up there. This is a wildlife crossing in Colorado on Highway 9 that I visited. The deer started using it 2 days after they finished it. It was pretty remarkable. And there's another view of Highway 9 with a moose. This is the path of the pronghorn I was talking about, Trapper's Point, and I got to visit this one too, and actually walk on top of it. The pronghorn aren't using it all times of the year, and it was really interesting to see from an engineering perspective how they reconnected that landscape. This is the Parlay Summit, the video that recently went viral, which I just loved, all the different animals using it. It was pretty cool. And these are the one of the I-90 crossings up in Washington State on Snoqualmie Pass. I visited these as well. And again, this is just such a great example of animals want to use these. There's a series of them being constructed, and on one of the overpasses, the deer were trying to use it before they were even done. But they've had a whole array. They have wolves, they have grizzly bears. Although, just as an aside, I just have to keep celebrating. There's a wolf spotted 40 miles from my house recently. I am over the moon. There will be wolves howling in Yosemite Valley soon, and outside my deck as well. And so I don't think it's out of the question at some point a wolf might use Liberty Canyon. It might be a little far for them to get, but we'll see. It's pretty exciting stuff. And this is one of the more recent ones that put up in Texas. They're claiming they're the largest in the country. We'll let them have it for a little bit until ours is done. But this is an interesting one that, of course, incorporates recreation and the wildlife as well. It's connecting two parks, so it's a pretty interesting bridge, and I'm actually hoping to visit it soon. So just to sort of get an idea of what they've been doing. This is one of my favorite wildlife crossings that is a little close to home. It's a Yosemite toad crossing, and these guys were getting, wasn't actually that busy a road, but these guys were getting hit, and the toads actually go under it. It's pretty cool. And then we have, there's actually a lot of crossings in play in California. I sit on a wildlife crossing working group that is groups all over the state and agencies all over the state, and there's different wildlife crossings in play there. And in my own organization, the National Wildlife Federation, we have a national team that I sit on that is looking at corridors and crossings and how to preserve migration routes all across the country. So I think the exciting news is the U.S. is really catching up here and taking leadership, both in California. This is a direct quote from both Gavin Newsom, our governor, and also Chuck Bonham, our leader of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. California wants to lead the way in crossings and corridor work. So, and I think, obviously Liberty is a good way to start that. And here, some of you have seen, these are the latest artist renditions. These started giving me chills because, we've been, the planning process, I know it seems slow to some, but this thing is racing. When you're talking less than 10 years from zero funding to an idea to break ground, something of this scope. Listen, I worked on the Valley Visitor Center. That took 40 years to build, right? I mean, this thing is really racing, but the Caltrans still has a process. And, so for a long time, we were just at 30% designed. And I know a lot of you were just used to looking at one or a couple, versions of what the design would look like. Myself included was getting bored with it. But now that we're in, sort of getting further along in design now, and I'll talk about that, we now have better data, and wow, look at what this is going to look like. It's just amazing. This is a view from above, obviously, and this is one of my favorite views because it really shows you that our crossing, I want to stress, every crossing has different goals, different needs. We are reconnecting an ecosystem for everything, right? We are this ecosystem. We didn't know it when we put the 101 in, what we were doing. We thought, oh, there's plenty of open space in the Santa Monica Mountains. What's a highway going to do? But we now know the long-term effects of that, which is isolation and genetic decline, which affects both plants, animals, you name it. So you can see this is pretty much reconnecting the ecosystem, or as Clark Stevens, who of the Resource Conservation District for the Santa Monica Mountains, who that early 30% design, that was something he assisted Caltrans with. He says, put the nose of the mountain back, which I love the poetry of that. And that's what we're doing. And that's why it's being designed for all wildlife in the area, right? So there's going to be not just things moving across it like the mountain lions or coyotes, but you're going to have the little stuff living on it, such as the harvester ants or the alligator lizards, birds that use the ground to travel, like roadrunners. And also something really interesting, the research has shown that birds actually will change their flight plans to fly over these things because they like flying over green space more than they do the cars, which makes sense to me. So let me stop there. I see a question I can answer. The crossing is going to be, we don't have final design yet, but it's about 165 wide by 200 long. And I get asked a lot, well, why can't we make it 4 feet long? Well, we can't. The reason is for the science around wildlife crossing says for every foot long it is, you have to go wider. And that's because you have to make the animals feel safe when they're going across the freeway. You have to trick them that they're not walking over a 10-lane freeway. And of course, we are trying to put it over one of the biggest freeways in the country. And listen, I'd be happy to build the smallest wildlife crossing in the world, but we can't, fix the 101, as well as we have to go after the access road Agoura too, so that the wildlife aren't just dropped down. The other thing that informs the design and the width and everything we have to put on it and a lot is the sound and light. What all these wildlife crossings you see, aside from the 101 just being bigger and a lot bigger than all these other roads, we get a lot more traffic here. We get about 300 to 400,000 cars a day. That Utah crossing, 14,000. Same, or it's like 10 to 14. The ones in Banff, 14,000. So we have to mitigate for sound and light and things like that. So the animals, we can't just get away with a chain link fence up there. So that's what's really interesting. As far as we're getting asked, I see those questions too. Will people be able to walk on it? Interestingly enough, early on in the project, that's what was proposed as part of the environmental document. And like you saw the Texas one, they were able to sort of do both. The scientists with the Santa Monica Mountain say, hey, these cats like P22 are using our trails anyway. So sure, let's, we can accommodate, you don't want it to be developed, but there's a trail on either side. So the thought was, let's just connect that trail for the hikers who do it. But as part of the public process early on, a lot of people just wanted to keep it for wildlife. And so we listened and changed the project scope after that. I personally like these space, I think scientifically it probably could work, but sure, let's just keep it for wildlife. So that's what the project is calling for now. It's just going to be for wildlife. Let's see, I think that's, there will be critter cams on it. Definitely. We will be taking lots of photos, obviously, both now and after. I will be addressing fundraising at the end, so I will get to that, I promise. I don't like to show these photos a lot, but this really is what, we're talking about, that, these mountain lions are either getting hit by cars trying to find new territory, or they can't find new territory. And I think P32 is, such a good example of that. Many of you probably followed his travels. He did everything right. He did what a good mountain lion should do, disperse, and went on his way only to be taken out by the 5. And just so people know, we're not stopping with Liberty Canyon. I mean, it's not the only problem. It's the biggest problem scientifically when you talk about a barrier, especially to any animals or mountain lions south of the 101. But we got to fix all these, including, Dr. Winston Vickers is heading up in the Santa Anas. The mountain lions are having the same problem. But that's what we're facing. And this map of their home ranges is a little outdated, but you can see how the freeways absolutely define these home ranges. And that's the problem, right? They don't cross the freeways, so that's why they're inbreeding themselves out of existence. And this is some work that the state of California did, which they sort of looked at all the research projects going on across the state. You have a new, was hired a few years ago, a new state person actually doing the first statewide study on mountain lions and sort of, looking at all these studies across the state and looking at the data they can provide holistically. And so what they came up with these population, it's about 10 sort of genetic clusters or whatever you want to call them. And you can see in the Sierra, which is the blue where I live, they got a pretty wide, genetic sort of range there. But then you get down to Southern California and like look at the Santa Monica Mountains, and it's just a small thing where there's not a lot of obviously potential for genetic exchange between populations. So that's sort of the problem we're trying to solve. And then I like to always joke with Jeff and Seth, the two lead scientists on the project, because science works. And they've been doing this research for over 20 years, or almost 20 years now. They released a lot of modeling early on, which is why we knew we needed to build a crossing, saying, hey, these guys, their genetic diversity is collapsing. We need to do something. If we don't do something, we're going to go the way of the Florida panther, who almost went extinct. Those guys were showing birth defects and going sterile, and that's coming for us. And what happened? It happened. We had this past summer, the first genetic abnormalities start showing up in our cats, which is kink tails, only one testy. And so why is that bad? You probably ask yourself, well, mountain lion can, probably still hunt with a kink tail. Yeah, but what that's showing is that, again, their genetic diversity is declining so much that probably the next point is sterility, and they're not even going to be able to reproduce on their own. So that's why that was sort of an alarm bell and painted the picture of, hey, we got to do something and fast. Wildfire, listen, nobody's a stranger to wildfire. I'm sure on this call, I've had to evacuate 3 years in a row. I didn't have to evacuate this past summer, but I was only 15 miles from the creek fire. But wildlife impacts wildlife, wildfire, and I don't even like to call them wildfires. They're human-caused firestorms at this point. Impacts wildlife in different ways. Every wildlife, that's native to California is adapted in some way to wildfire for the most part. And mountain lions are no exceptions. Their adaptation is they can move. And if it burns here, they can move somewhere else. Well, as we know, on the Santa Monica Mountains, they don't have a lot of options to move. And with the Woolsey fire, I think it was 50% of the open space burned and 87% of the federal land. So they just don't have a lot of options to move to when a fire occurs. And this was P64 who died a couple weeks after the Woolsey fire. And what was interesting with P64, who was one of my favorite cats, he's the one that learned to use that little culvert. He couldn't get out, based on the GPS points. The scientists think that he couldn't get out of the fire's burn zones because of roads and human activity. And we had P74, who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It looked like, much like people, we can just be unlucky and be in the wrong place at the wrong time with fire. That looks like what hit him. But for P64, it might again be our roads that doomed him. He could not get out of the burn zone. We also have challenges like rodenticides, which I just always, even if my talk isn't on it, like to give a call out for like Poison Free Malibu and other groups and all the work they're doing, because even P22 wasn't immune from rodenticides. And we have to fix the connectivity problem, but we also have to fix these poisons in our systems if this mountain lion population is going to make it. So here is where we're going to put the crossing. I think a lot of this is actually a shot I took from a helicopter. From the air, it's just so clear, like, oh yeah, we got to connect this space. And this is a little misleading because it looks like, oh, there's just open space as far as the eye can see. But we know, Calabasas is here and Agoura proper is over there. This map really shows what we're trying to do, which is we are really trying to connect the open space on both sides of the freeway and get these cats to facilitate genetic exchange so that, again, you look at the Santa Monica Mountains and that brown, there's a lot of open space there that they can use. And you start going up north and there's a lot of open space, but it narrows to this last 1,600 feet where there's protected space on both sides of the freeway that they need to navigate. So that's what we're trying to connect is, the open space on both sides. And then, of course, we have our boy P22. So that's sort of, that first half is sort of connectivity, why it's important, and also, what we're trying to do there. I'm going to go into a little bit P22 in the campaign, and this is where we'll get to an update. I might race through some of these just because I'm running out of time and I want to get to questions. But I at least want to talk about the campaign and how we're doing this, which to me has been kind of fun as well. Mark asked, will they still have to cross Agoura Road? No. So if you go back to, let's see. You can see that second, if you go over the main structure, there's actually going to be a crossing over Agoura Road as well. And that, again, came as part of the design evolution. You know, some of the first, like, 10 years ago was looking, well, maybe we just build it over the 101. But the wildlife crossing experts that we brought in took a look at the sites and said, no, you got to cover Agoura Road as well. You can't just drop the animals down in the middle of a road. So, yeah, yes. Okay, so let's get into the P22 story real quick. I mean, this is our hero, and I think we owe a lot. It takes a village, and there's a lot of people involved, but we owe a lot to P22 and what he's done, because that's one of the reasons we're getting a wildlife crossing built. I mean, we have the science, and I'm a scientist, and science is important. We wouldn't know we needed to build a crossing if it wasn't for the National Park Service research. We wouldn't know how to build crossings if it wasn't for science. But to get these things built takes public will. And that's where the emotion and the storytelling come in. And, they'd been talking about this thing for, 20 years or doing something, but talking in terms like biodiversity or, climate resiliency. Those are true and, scientific, but it just wasn't getting people, excited or engaged or wanting to support in a widespread way. And then you have this lonely, dateless cougar who crossed 2 freeways and is now trapped in Griffith Park and probably will never have love because of the 405 divide, which a lot of Angelinos can relate to. And now you're talking, people can relate to this connectivity thing being an issue in ways they haven't before. So, we really got to give a shout out to our boy here. He doesn't know it, but, he's really changed the way people think about urban wildlife, that a mountain lion can live in LA and that there are mountain lions in the greater LA area, and that he's going to get a crossing built that is going to help ensure his relatives and his kind goes on and doesn't vanish from the landscape he came from. I don't think he knows he's doing all that. I think most of us know the P22 story, so I'll kind of skip through that. But, this is what he had to navigate. And you can see the absolute urbanization he is living in. And as someone who has retraced this route on foot, and some of you who are listening may have joined me, I can't believe I make it, never mind any animal. I mean, you see the first part of the journey, you're pretty much in the Santa Monica Mountains. You're a lot on the Backbone Trail or close to that. But once you cross the 405, I mean, there's no sidewalks in Mulholland. It's insane. That this cat made this journey is one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen. This is my favorite photo of him, more than it's a Steve Winter photo as well. And we have to thank Steve Winter. He is one that, again, that picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think, again, really was a game changer for urban wildlife and getting people engaged in the cause. But this is my favorite Steve Winter photo, because this is what P22 faces every day, and why he's probably stayed in Griffith Park, which is, not normal for a mountain lion to stay within just 8 square miles. But what's his options, right? He's probably like, I ain't crossing those freeways again. And because of sort of an artificial level of deer in the park, he's probably, got enough to eat, and so far so good. So, I think this photo tells it all more than anything. And here's some recent photos of P22. These were just taken. He's got some attitude in these. Jeff Sickich just recolored him and did a check, and he's looking good for a mountain lion that's literally, at least typical mountain lions. He's approaching sort of old age, but he's still looking pretty good. A little more gray on him, but don't we all, right? So, the campaign itself really focuses on the story of P22. And this is, we've had a lot of fun with it. My favorite headline is Wildlife Mating Bridge could bring more sexy time to California cougars. P22 has a Facebook page where people talk to him and they can, see his poop. We do polls like who's hotter, Brad Pitt or P22. And what this has done is, connect people to this mountain lion in a way that's really fun, but they're learning about mountain lion behavior. They're learning about why connectivity is important. And then, of course, it's Hollywood, right? We have celebrity fun. Jared Leto recently posted some photos of P22's Stuffy. My absolute favorite actor of all time, I got to meet and talk mountain lions with Viggo Mortensen. And then this was my, that sort of question was going around, post your last photo before shutdown. Well, I went out with a bang, because this literally was my last event And then the next day I literally had to leave LA because California was shutting down. Sean Penn and his now wife, Leela George, did a benefit at the LA Zoo for Australian wildlife and also for Save LA Cougars. And then Governor Gavin Newsom, those of you who know, his dad was instrumental in mountain lion protections, and he is very supportive of this project. We gave him a tour a year ago that almost lasted an hour. He had great questions. He wants this to happen as well. But aside from the notables and the celebrities, this is what is important to me, is that people all over relate to P22 and want him as part of the landscape. You know, we have P22 trading cards, and I'm wearing my P22 winter, we call it a holiday sweater, but you know, it's fine for cold. The P22 new masks are out and very popular, and proceeds from all the sales of these go right to the wildlife crossing. Of course, the plushie's been very popular. We did a VR film. We have an artist now, Jonathan Martinez from LA, who's doing murals for us in schools so that P22 can be everywhere for them. And then there's these crazy people who get tattoos, and that's mine on the upper right-hand corner. I do a lot of work in schools, and you know, the kids are real, they get it, and they advocate for P22. They do work on P22 and connectivity. We have a hip hop artist from Watts who we work with, who wrote a song about P22 and does a lot of music around connectivity. And indeed, we did in 2019 our first annual Wildlife to Watts event around the P22 events. And here's some scenes from last year and the year before. This past year in 2020, we obviously couldn't do a big event, but we walked around Watts with some native wildlife, which was pretty cool. And then, of course, the official P22 day, a lot of you have been to. I won't spend too much time because we're running out of time, but you know, I do the hike, which is, I encourage all of you to do it. It's pretty eye-opening. Here's some posters from the years. Here's some scenes. What I like the most is we give the students precedent and stage time. So some of them do dances to P22. Some of them, like you see in this photo, have built wildlife crossings. And you know, there's a lot of groups and that come to this and participate and teach people how to coexist. But I love the students and the work they've put into learning about connectivity in the mountain lions. And this year we went virtual. This year we did a virtual festival, which was really popular. We had overall about 20,000 people attend. I'm not going to show the video. You can see it online. But it was pretty cool. We had Governor Gavin Newsom give a keynote, and the Black Pumas, we had them first. They were at the inauguration, and are now up for a Grammy, but they did a custom video for us as well. They're P22's favorite band, no surprise. And I like to review all that because we don't just do it for fun, although I have to say, you know, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, and it's a great way to get people engaged. But there's an end result here, and it is, we're getting this wildlife crossing built because of all this engagement and because all these people want it to happen. I mean, the media we get, over 1 billion media impressions worldwide. And what this has done is connect people to P22 and mountain lions and native wildlife in a way that they're not afraid of it anymore. And they're okay with living with a mountain lion. Yesterday was actually the anniversary of when P22 decided to munch on one of the cutest animals on a planet, which is the koala at the LA Zoo. He just thought it was a raccoon. But what happened here? It was really interesting to watch. I remember waking up that morning, like getting the text, I think it was from Jeff, going, what? He did what? You know, I'd never thought I'd be releasing a statement in my conservation career about a mountain lion in Los Angeles eating a koala. Like, what? But, you know, this is a little worrisome. You know, so there were some early voices, see, he's too dangerous, you know, and quickly tapped down all the way, you know, up to Mayor Garcetti, to people coming out, nope, P22 belongs there, to the zoo actually apologizing and saying, hey, our fences weren't high enough. And the world noticed this. New York Times, who's, you know, never really the best at getting LA or California right, was like, what's these crazy people in LA? They're saying they're okay living with an admittedly dangerous predator. And so I think this was a real testament that people were coming down on the side of native wildlife. And to me, that was really encouraging, that, you know, P22 is really shifting a value system. And I always just like to throw in just some safety facts. I don't have a lot of time to spend on it, but it's never zero risk with any wild animal. Even ticks can kill you, right? Much like it's never zero risk with people. But mountain lion, the risk is so low. In California, in the last 100 years, with 40 million people, there's been less than 20 attacks and just 6 deaths. Now, those 6 deaths are awful and we don't want them to happen. But what I just ask people is just to put the risk in perspective. We take risks with our lives every day we're okay with. The 101, if you look at the stats for cars in California, automobiles cause over 3,600 deaths a year and over 162,000 injuries annually. And we're all okay with getting in our cars. So that's what I just ask people to really just put the risk in perspective on the safety. And then lastly, let's just get into it. We're building this bridge, and all this engagement, all of these people participating, all of you out there has resulted in these stats, which are pretty darn impressive. When I started working on this in 2012, it was an idea. Was it a tunnel? Was it just fencing? Was it an overpass? Could we even do it? And there was no money attached to it. We're now at 18 million and counting. When the environmental review went out, it was 8,800 for and 15 against. That's unheard of. I've worked on a lot of public projects. It's usually about 50-50. 1 billion media impressions. Actually, I need to update. It's over 3,000 donors across the world. And then tangentially, Prop 68 passed, which provided funding for wildlife and wildlife crossings. And then we had the unprecedented, even for California, the ESA vote, which was 5-0 to advance protections for like almost a third of the state for ESA listing for mountain lions. So that's pretty incredible even for California. The partnership. So this is how we're getting this done, aside from the fundraising and engagement and education. It takes a village, and there are a lot of people involved, but the 5 agencies or organizations that literally are living and breathing this day to day are these 5. My own organization was the last partner to come on board, the National Wildlife Federation. We are the national group that's bringing the conservation expertise and also the expertise around doing these large scale projects in a collaborative way. We've done projects in the Great Lakes and the Gulf. And the Caltrans, I mean, it's their road. We couldn't do it without them. And they've been incredible. They basically just said, listen, we'll do this for you, but we don't have a budget for it. Get us the money. And that's the other thing NWF took responsibility for, is the fundraising. The National Park Service, again, we wouldn't know we needed a crossing without their research, or that the mountain lions were even in trouble. So it's their ongoing research. It hasn't stopped, that informs how we do this and why it's needed. The Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains, they are the experts at landscape restoration and how to do this right. And it's not just the crossing we need to think about, but the landscape around it and how that leads to the crossing. So it's sort of like this big picture that they really inform. And then the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, I have to give an incredible shout out to. It's their land they will be managing the land on top of the crossing, because it's connecting their 2 areas of protected land. But that they had the foresight to protect land on both sides of the freeway before wildlife crossings were even being talked about was pretty incredible. Connectivity is sort of emerging and it was not talked about, but I'm finding memos from their scientists, many of you know Paul, like in the early 80s, like maybe we should do a wildlife corridor. So it's amazing, because if we didn't have that, again, this is the last 1,600 feet, there's protected space on both sides. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to put a wildlife crossing. The number one thing you need for a wildlife crossing to be successful is protected space on both sides. So that's the partnership getting this done. And our campaign is building the wildlife crossing, but also embedded in what we are doing is continuing the mountain lion research. We have an endowment budgeted for that. They actually are not fully funded year to year. So that's a piece of it. And also the long-term habitat maintenance for the crossing is a piece of it. And also, as you know, the education and engagement around the crossing. As of March 11th, today, we've raised 18 million plus and over 3,000 donors. I think it's really important to note, we weren't sure how we were going to do last year, because rightly so, the pandemic had to take priority, but we raised almost 4 million in 2020, even with those challenges. So I think it shows people want this to happen. And we had this incredible donor who put up $1.4 million at the end of last year for the crossing, which was pretty incredible. So real quick, where are we? These are Caltrans phases. So this is what you have to do for any project. It's not unique for a wildlife crossing. We had to do the feasibility study, done. MRCA, Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, donated $250,000, finished in 2015. That was, can this be done? Yep, it could be done. The environmental assessment cost $1.2 million for Caltrans to prepare. Save LA Cougars wrote a grant with the State Coastal Conservancy. We got it, done, funded in 2018. And of course, the environmental assessment was completed in 2018. So where we're at right now is step 3 of 4, which is final design and engineering for Caltrans. This is underway. There's never been a delay. I go to design meetings every week. I don't understand half of it. I'm not an engineer. But it is really exciting to see it progress. And I'm happy to announce we just hit the 60% design mark at the end of February. So this is pretty exciting. And Caltrans will have blueprints done in August. So pretty incredible stuff. And then if we stay on track with fundraising, we will be breaking ground in November. So I get asked a lot, wow, isn't that a big gap to cover? Sure it is. But, I've worked on a lot of capital campaigns, and here is what, we've been in talks with donors for years. And what a lot of them tell us, which is very typical, they can't donate till you get to blueprints or until you hit some of these design thresholds. People don't like to give to planning. They like to give to shovel ready. So as we are approaching blueprints, a lot of these conversations are accelerating really fast. And that's been exciting because some of these people I've been talking to for 9 years, the whole length of the campaign. And these asks are not, these are 30 million and 10 million and 5 million asks. So that gap is going to get closed pretty quickly. And I'm still very optimistic we will hit that date just based on the conversations I'm having. But we just got to get this design advance, which we're doing. So it's a really exciting time to be involved with the crossing. And I like to, end with a kitten photo. Again, one of the recent kittens, because now what's exciting is we can start taking bets on which of the new kittens might be the first to use the wildlife crossing. To get out of the Santa Monica Mountains and disperse and find new genetic material. And then, of course, which cougars are going to come in and save the Santa Monica Mountains population with their new diverse genetic material. And I'll just end with something hopeful, which was really cool. No pressure now, but National Geographic named us the top thing to look forward to in 2021, which is breaking ground on the wildlife crossing. So exciting stuff. Phew, okay, I tried to cover a lot in that time, but hopefully we have some time for questions now. And like I said, if I don't get to your question, that's all my contact information right there.
Well, thank you, Beth. This is great. And we do have time for questions.
Right.
We could run up until 8 o'clock if we need to. And we do have a number of questions that have come in. Brendan, have you been checking out the questions and want to lead off with a couple?
Yeah, sure, Jerry. Beth, thank you. That was incredibly informative. I learned a lot. The first question, where is the money coming from? Mm-hmm.
So this is being funded 100% from the Save LA Cougars campaign effort. And the breakdown as far as like who is giving, what we always had as a campaign strategy and was about 80% private, 20% public. So, dollars coming from mainly the state. But and one of the reasons we did that is this is just unprecedented. We really wanted the private philanthropic community to step up here. As you can see, I mean, this wildlife crossing on every level it's never been done in an urban area, trying to mitigate for all the things I talked about, sound, light, you name it, that it's, an extinction of a species, to say nothing of one of the reasons that it makes it a little harder to engineer and that drives up the price tag here and there is it's a really hard place to put a wildlife crossing. Unlike a lot of these other crossings where they're like, oh, in Nevada, that's a really easy place to put it. Let's put it there. Or in Utah, this one, it's the only place we have left. And as all the engineers and architects can tell you, it means being angled. And so just to go on, there's just so much that's unprecedented. We thought private investment is what is going to have to fuel this one. And also, we don't have time. These mountain lines are out of time, as we know. So we can't wait the usual 40-year time horizon to get all the public money together. So it's always been a real focus on private philanthropy. However, having said that, as I said, a lot of the planning dollars, it's a little harder to get from private philanthropy. It's been more weighted in that area with state money. But the only state money we are taking as part of the campaign is that has to be spent on conservation. That was something from the beginning. We set that as a goal. This is not money that's coming from transportation projects or fixing bridges or hospitals, or that would go to the homeless. For instance, Prop 68, where we've gotten some funds, that has to be spent voter approved. That's a ballot measure that people said, yes, we want it spent on conservation. So that is where the money is coming from, if that helps. And, some of our donors, just to thank them, the Annenberg Foundation put up $1 million, Leonardo DiCaprio, the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, that's where some of the Prop 68 money came from, $3 million. The Wildlife Conservation Board's allocated $5 million. We had the anonymous donor. We have a couple from Kansas. And this is why, to me, we get donations from all over the world. This isn't just an LA story or a California story. We get donations from London and Florida and Hong Kong. We had this couple from Kansas. I was telling this story to Jerry before, that this woman called me up. They have been National Wildlife Federation members for their whole lives. They read an article in our member magazine, and she called me up, and she sounded like this delightful lady who loved cats. And I talked with her for 45 minutes, and at the end of the call, she's like, thank you. I'm really interested in this project. I'll be sending you a small donation. That small donation has turned into almost, $750,000. They've been to LA once in their life. They never want to go back. They're retired. They're in their 80s, but they're so inspired by us trying to do this unprecedented thing that they are one of our major donors. So, this is really inspiring the world, and it's inspiring other projects. But so private philanthropists are stepping up, and again, a lot of these agencies too are saying we want this to happen. So that's where the funding's coming from.
Great. Thank you, Beth. The next one is from Carl Benz, and his question is, what statistics were used to determine the appropriate width to encourage successful crossing by mountain lions?
Boy, you would have to attend our design meetings for that. And this isn't one of those, this is a faceted design approach where there's so many factors going into it. And I will tell you who, you have Tony Clevenger, one of the top wildlife crossing experts in the world. In fact, I'd probably call him the top. He has worked for 30 years on crossings. He's a biologist. He helped build the Banff ones. He's studied what works, what doesn't work. He is the one who did, and I can send you the citation. He's the one who actually came up with the sort of the ideal sort of length versus width ratio that you should at least at minimum try to achieve. But it's not just a one-off like that, right? As I told you, we have a multidisciplinary team that actually National Wildlife Federation fundraised for on top of the Caltrans budget, right? Because one of the things we realized after the environmental documents were done, you got these 5 partners who all bring incredible expertise to the table. Caltrans is the biggest transportation agency in the country. They know how to build a bridge like nobody else, right? They've never built a wildlife crossing. National Park Service has never built a wildlife crossing. National Wildlife Federation has never, so Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy never built a wildlife crossing. So we brought in some of the top experts in the world. We now have a multidisciplinary team that's been working side by side with Caltrans to look at what is going to make this the most effective wildlife crossing for mountain lions and other wildlife. And that's where considerations like width and sound wall design, which impacts how the crossing's shaped and how big it needs to be. So there's a lot that goes into these design considerations. So I can certainly send you the citation on that ideal width, but there's a lot playing into it.
Here's another question that's kind of related from Eric. Beth, how will the wildlife crossing adapt to potential future widening of the 101 freeway and or Agoura Road?
Well, where this crossing's being put, this is being put in for the long term. So you're not going to be able to widen either while this crossing's up. That's just, although we are putting in for Agoura Road, we actually are putting in more than is there now. The city of Agoura had some considerations that we accommodated. Much like you have, bridges now in certain areas that you just, you can't widen. The wildlife crossing will limit that. That's, unless you want to knock it out and redo it.
I imagine there's been a lot of research, though, looking at traffic flow and patterns and so on to indicate how wide it should be and if it should accommodate any future widening of the freeway. And it doesn't sound like that.
No, I mean, again, this is not me building this. I just want to be clear that, I'm the spokesperson, and this is Caltrans and these wildlife crossing experts, right? They know what they're doing. So yeah, Caltrans.
I thought it was the Pratt Bridge.
Yeah, the underneath is a bridge, although interestingly enough, it has to be engineered differently. These are things that were fascinating to learn. You would think if it's just for wildlife, it doesn't need to carry as heavy a load as for cars. Absolutely. Actually, you have to engineer it for a heavier load because of the soil load is heavier because you're actually growing things on this, right? So, but yeah, Caltrans is following all safety standards. They're following all engineering guidance, all planning guidance. And yeah, I mean, they obviously are not concerned about widening the road if they're putting it in there.
Here's another question from Kathleen. And I think others probably wonder about this. How many mountain lions do we still have in Southern California? With the advent of these ring cameras on houses, it seems as if there are reports of mountain lion sightings in backyards on a weekly basis. But I don't think that necessarily means that there are more mountain lions present. Is that right?
Yeah, here's what I can tell you. There's never been a statewide count of mountain lions in the state of California. Now, as I told you, they just hired this incredible scientist a few years ago. He was working in Wyoming on cougar work as well to start doing that, right? But nobody knows. The estimate usually given of about 4,000 to 6,000 is based on math, right? About half of California is suitable mountain lion habitat. And if you put in their average territory size, 100 to 200 square miles, you get about 4,000 to 6,000 mountain lions. Because one thing we know about mountain lions, unlike some other animals, they're not going to overpopulate. They kill each other over territory. They don't share territory, right? So we can get some pretty good ideas of how much a landscape can support just because you just don't have mountain lions sharing territory. As far as so anybody that tells you, they know how many mountain lions or that mountain lion populations are increasing, I don't think so. The data, at least that I look at, doesn't support that they're even increasing. I think what you saw in California is obviously, back in the, before mountain lions protected, you had them hunted. So the population was pretty low. You then get, mountain lion protections, which to me was such a great bipartisan effort. That involved Ronald Reagan and, it was just, the state coming together. And then finally in 1990 with Prop 117, which the, people of the state said, we don't want them hunted. So once, mountain lions were protected, if you look at, to me, it was the depredation permits, which really tells what's going on. Of course, you had an increase because the mountain lions were getting back up to sort of repopulating where they had been hunted out of, but then it sort of levels off. And I think, you're just not going to have an overpopulation. I don't think we're seeing more mountain lions. I think we just are seeing mountain lions where they always were, but we didn't have these great technologies like wildlife cameras and ring cameras and things like that. So that's at least my scientific guess based on the data. But I'm very curious, again, as this sort of statewide study continues, they're also looking at deer statewide, right? You get a lot of people saying, oh, the mountain lions are killing all the deer and there's less deer. Well, again, there's never been a statewide count. So that's just something that is not rooted in data yet. So these efforts are going on. In fact, right at Liberty Canyon, Jeff and Seth are starting to collar deer to get some baseline data around Liberty Canyon before the crossing goes up, which is pretty exciting. So as far as the Southern California, we don't know. As far as sort of the Santa Monica Mountains area, if you kind of do the math, 10 to 15, maybe. Jeff and Seth will tell you, we don't know. They have about 10 collared in the Greta area at any one time. But of course, that's not all the mountain lions. So I hope, that's a really long answer to your question to say we just kind of don't know.
Here's Brendan, go ahead. Do you want to read one?
Sure. There's a question here actually from Katie Wilsker, who's a science teacher, middle school at Oak Park Unified School District, who I work with. And her question is, what advice would you give to teachers looking to get their students involved?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of schools and I love it. That hike I do, I usually have about 200 students joining me. The kids get it in a way that adults, I have to like lead adults a little more to why connectivity importance. I think the kids get it in a way we don't, and maybe we got it at the time and forgot, but I always start with the wildlife, and then the rest will lead. I mean, the classes love P22 and what he represents. And I think some of the creative things that we've seen at P22 Day that really get the kids engaged. And I got to give a shout out to like Brad Rumble at Esperanza Elementary, who's had his kids write letters to P22. And if we have time, maybe I'll show that video to end. Put on plays. But there's something about this like isolated animal that's trapped that the kids get creative around. And then this further sort of feeds them into learning about why connectivity is important and things like that. Katie, I'll be happy to send you if you email me. We have a whole bunch of curriculum and activities we put together for students. I do school talks. We have the P22. I didn't get into it. And again, maybe if we have time, if we run out of questions, that P22 virtual site is still up with, the students can still go in there. It's a pretty cool experience. It has video games like Get P22 Across the Road. It has all the exhibits. It has activities about connectivity in mountain lions. But there's something cool, or as the kids say, there's something really metal about mountain lions that they just seem to be enamored with. I've just not seen a school kid not really get excited about it. So I'm happy to send you those resources that we've developed so that you can get your students involved. And I think there's also something really cool, from a sort of STEAM or STEM standpoint. They can plug into it in any way. Like I said, we have art. We have a muralist that the kids are actually, we have videos that you can access where he teaches kids how to draw a mountain lion. You have music. Warren, the hip hop artist, comes to me for school talks, and you can watch his video at the P22 site, and kids get engaged in the music. There's the science, right? This is everything from biology, the mountain lion, what's going on with the mountain lions, to engineering, right? Build your own crossing, to physics, it's just been really cool to see how the teachers take this local project that the kids can sort of watch now from start to finish as they grow older, and plug into it in whatever way they like. So happy to send you resources and happy to do a talk at your school.
Oh, nice. So we've shown pictures of P22, which is collared. So here's a question you probably get fairly frequently. Marty Edwards had asked this. If they have recollared P22, why can't they move him to a safer area?
It's a really good question. We get asked, A, why can't we move him? And B, why don't we bring a female in, right? So a couple things there. One is, moving mountain lions is, at best risky. It doesn't always work. And there's nowhere, wherever you move him, there's no unoccupied mountain lion space, right? So where a mountain lion can be, there is a mountain lion. And so you are introducing P22, he'd have to fight to the death or something to claim his own territory. And there's no guarantee P22 would be the victor. So you're kind of displacing a mountain lion. And also, when you plop down any wildlife, but a mountain lion in a strange place, you're starting to introduce, the potential for conflict. Think about if you were plopped down 100 miles away from your home and like, where am I? It's the same thing for cats. P22 could even try to go back, right? That's his home. He's claimed it. He could, then you'd introduce, you'd probably risk his safety even more. So, the biologists, listen, the good news about P22 and these other mountain lions, they're the most, probably next to the Florida panther, monitored mountain lion population in the world. So, the Jeff and Seth, who are just incredible biologists, are keeping tabs on these guys. I think if P22 had ever looked like he was, just gonna not make it, they'd look at other alternatives. But moving's pretty risky. And then what if you bring a female in? Well, as a fifth grader once asked me, I said, I tried to give sort of the the fifth grade answer, well, blind dates don't always work out for mountain lions, and he might not like her. And the fifth grader raised his hand and said, I have a follow-up question, Miss Pratt. And I'm like, what? He's like, well, could you bring her 3? I thought that was such a creative example. But Griffith Park's not big enough for 2 mountain lions, and you'd have to move her in and out. And indeed, he could kill her. Mountain lions aren't known for always being tolerant of even potential mates if they don't like them. So I think, they're monitoring him. He's working it out. It is sad he'll never breed, because I think he's a pretty remarkable cat. Or I shouldn't say never. I never say never. But that's the reason why they don't relocate him. I will say this, what's very interesting, there has been a cat hanging around in between the 405 and 101 for years now. He's been caught on camera by like Claw, another great group doing work down there. They haven't managed to get a collar on him, so they're not tracking him per se, but he keeps popping up on these cameras. Hasn't crossed the 101 yet into Griffith Park. It would be very interesting if he did. Because now you have a challenge situation. I don't know that P22 would be the victor. P22 hasn't had to fight anybody since 2012. So that would be a very interesting situation. And I say interesting as the probably like, I really want to say crap that, might not bode well for either cat. So yeah, that's been kind of interesting to follow. So far, P22, as we know, has not really left Griffith Park, and this cat hasn't shown an interest in crossing the 101. So I think it's probably best if he doesn't, but it could happen. So
good answer. There's a question about, is the state covering any of the cost? And I think you discussed that at the end of your talk. So here's a very interesting one from John K. Occasionally I hear people say that you can hear the roar before you see the cougar, but cougars don't roar. What sound do they make?
Yeah, so mountain lions don't roar. They are the group of cats that don't. You'd have to go to like the African lions and stuff. So I wish they did. It would be really cool if P22 was walking around Griffith Park, roar, right? But no, he doesn't roar. Mountain lions are actually extremely quiet. And I would say, actually, you're probably not going to hear anything before you see a cougar, right? They actually don't want you to hear them. Their nickname is ghost cats, right? So they are very stealthy. I say that most people haven't seen a mountain lion, but I'm guessing for most people, a mountain lion has seen you. Mm-hmm. So, they're probably not going to make any noises before you see them. And then what they probably will make is some noises to warn you away. But they, they're typical sort of, if you have domestic cats, like, sort of growls and hisses. But they're pretty quiet except for mating. Oh my God. If you haven't heard, just Google mountain lion mating sounds. It sounds like bloody murder. It sounds like a woman screaming when she's being murdered. Those are, but that's not a threatening sound to us. It's not like you'd hear that if you saw a mountain lion. It's just when they're mating. They also make a series, if you have domestic cats as well, like I do, your cats will sometimes chirp and click, like when they see a bird or something. Mountain lions will make those sounds as well. Indeed, Miguel Ordiana, who discovered, as part of a study, the first photos of P22, they now have, the cameras have gotten better. We now have cameras with sound. He picked up P22 making the noise. It's a very quiet noise, like almost a clicking or clucking maybe. The noise for, hey, anybody out there? So P22 even hasn't given up, which I think is really, really, makes me kind of sad, but also, wow, he's still got hope. So I will, maybe a girl will find him. Although again, introduces a very interesting situation for us. But what we will hear, and if you saw that viral video of the jogger in the mountain lion that went around, you saw that mountain lion making a lot of warning noises. That was a really interesting educational video, and I did a lot of interviews around it. I didn't fault the jogger too much, except for his biggest mistake, the first one. He should not have approached those kittens, and probably the whole thing could have been avoided. But for someone who knew nothing about mountain lion behavior, he did okay. I think he didn't know, those of us who know mountain lion behavior knew that cat was not there to kill him. In fact, that's what I took issue with. The press was like, escape deadly encounter. Now that cat could have killed him and was doing everything it could to avoid a situation, looking big, turning to its side, hissing, growling, bluff charge, they have on and I'm going to kill this person mode. So those are sort of if a cat is feeling threatened by you, those are some of the noises you hear. But yeah, I think it would be kind of fun if mountain lions roared, but no.
Well, speaking of noise, here's a question from one of our attendees. How exactly is the project, the bridge project, addressing the sound and light issues? We have 10 lanes of freeway.
This is fascinating to me, and I'm learning enough about how sound and light travel to get me in trouble. But let me see if I can get back to one of the designs real quick. So sound's a big problem for us on this freeway. Again, you have to make the animals feel safe, not just on the crossing, but at the approach. And again, I talked about that team. Come on, get there. I should just have one of these at the end because people always ask crossing questions and I like to. So we have to mitigate for these things. There's a lot of things going on with sound and light, and two people who again are who have provided data or insight along with this team, like I've told you, Tony Clevenger and others. Again, Barry Schilling at the UC Davis Road Ecology Center. He's the head of that. He's done a lot of lights and sound studies. Travis Longcore, Dr. Travis Longcore, did this really cool. In fact, you can check it out. I did a talk with him as part of our P22 Presents series, where he mapped out P22's likely route to Griffith Park and showed that it was probably mostly based on light pollution, that he probably followed the path where the light pollution was least. So the way we're addressing this, and again, this is coming from a team of experts. These are, I like to stress, there's no easy answer to design questions because this is integrated design. Has to tie in with the existing landscape, has to tie in with the structure. So what you're getting is you're getting sound at the approach, you're getting sound when they're on the crossing, and a lot of that sound actually comes from below, which was really interesting for me to learn. You're getting sound that's bouncing off the canyon walls you have to mitigate for, right? So it's not as simple as just putting up a sound wall, because that may bounce and then deter the animal at the approach. I mean, this was fascinating design sessions to go through and hear from the experts. So a few ways they're addressing this, you can see, and this is different from the early designs, because again, this is why we brought in the experts. We needed to know what we were addressing. You can see on the side, I'm pointing like you can see where I'm pointing, sorry, but you can see on that photo there, or the visualization, on the side there, you can see there's a little wall, and then you see green that's breaking up sort of the side. The solution they came up with was actually a vegetated sound wall, because vegetation absorbs sound, right? So there are a lot of strategies around sound absorption, deflection, mitigate things like that. So that's part of the strategy. Part of the strategy is some of the vegetated, you see gabion walls, what they call them on the side. Those are vegetated. Again, they're going to absorb some sound. And then there's a lot more they're looking into or that's going into the design that's helping with that as well. And it's the same principle with light, right? That how high those walls need to be to mitigate light. Vegetation will play into that, things like that. So like I said, these are not simple design questions. And having this team, we have everything from a mycologist who's advising on what is the fungus that needs to be collected so that we can propagate it, so that we're going to have the right soil propagation and plant propagation on the crossing, right? And these are all integrated into like what the structure needs to be and things like that. So anyway, that's how we're addressing sound. It's not just at the crossing and on it, it's around it as well.
Then how about light? Is it just
same thing. Like the height of the crossing walls, is going to play into that. Obviously, how you're landscaping around. And again, I can only talk enough to get me in trouble. If somebody's really interested in that, I can put you in touch with the people on our team that are the lighting experts and how that works.
Right. So there was a question that came up earlier.
I'm just a biologist.
Well, you're doing a great job with what you know. A question came up earlier this week that I passed on to you, and it's a related question. This is, are there any houses impacted by the design on the Agoura side? And the question earlier this week was, is my life going to be destroyed by the sound of the construction? Will it be going 24/7? I don't know if you have any answers to that, but
I do. I talked to Caltrans, and we are very sensitive to this. So no, the design itself and the project footprint is not, I mean, there's actually, for those of you familiar and those of you who live there, and I'm sure you are going to, I mean, you know about this project if you live there, but yeah, there's houses right on the south side. There's a housing development right there. The north side is pretty open, and there's a school a little up the road, but for the most part, it's, the closest you're getting is Old Agoura, which is over the hill. But yeah, the south side, there's some houses there. But most of the construction, the start's gonna be in the north side anyway. I asked Caltrans because I wanted an answer for you. And the answer I got is, I'm going to just read it to you. These are the people who, obviously they do construction everywhere. The wildlife crossing case construction will be conducted at a further difference, for the 101 side than houses as far as residential constructions as concerned. It'll be once they hit the south, which is where you'll be closer to residential area. It'll be a normal construction site noise level. The good news is we will not have any pile driving foundation equipment. We will have concrete trucks, pumps, and contractor equipment coming in and out. I don't think the noise level will be that much higher than freeway traffic noise level during the day. Most of the construction will be done during the day with some night work, but it's not going to be a 24/7 project. So I hope that, once we get final blueprints and once a contractor we actually will have, more information about construction. He wasn't being, hey, we don't have final design yet. What we are going to be holding soon is actually, starting to hold a series of meetings. And what we've asked one of the team members to do is put together sort of a storyboard of what construction will look like with, information about what will be going on through the duration so that everybody will know what to expect. So I hope that answered your question. As we get more information on the design and the contractor who is selected as we get closer, obviously we'll have more information on the construction schedule.
well, let's get back to the biology for a minute. This is a good question from Dave S. If mountain lions don't share territory, what happens when the lion north of the 101 then meets one from the south of the 101?
This is what happens in nature, right? So, and this is what has happened for the few that have been able to get across. So somebody challenges and takes over the territory. P12 was a great, example of this, right? So this is what is happening in an ecosystem isn't fragmented, is they're trading territories, right? So the mountain lions south of the freeway are going north or trying to. Obviously they can't, and that's one of the problems. They get killed trying to disperse out. P22 being one of the exceptions. But they go disperse and mate with animals outside their family, and then mountain lions from the north will come in and challenge a territory, and then they get to mate with folks outside their families. So it's just about allowing sort of nature to take its course and having that that exchange so that you're not inbreeding. So I mean, they'll challenge it, but that's what happens in areas where you don't have obstacles, is that you're getting mountain lions dispersing away from their home, where they grew up, and mating with animals that aren't their sisters or their granddaughters, and that's what you're seeing south. So it's not that there won't be challenges, but we just want the challenges to happen outside of their families.
Now, you mentioned this a little bit. I think you said there was a crossing planned for going over the 5, but where are some of the other wildlife crossings planned in the state?
No, I want to put one over the 5. Not okay. That's another target area. So yeah, there's an array of projects. It's really exciting. There's a lot going on, and this Wildlife Corridor Working Group is pretty incredible. So you have right now, Santa Cruz is another area, the 17, for those of you who've been up there. They actually are looking at putting 2 underpasses there across those roads. That's another thing I forgot to mention. We get asked a lot, well, why don't you do a tunnel? We actually looked at a tunnel as part of the feasibility study, and a couple reasons. One, again, these wildlife crossing experts who we brought out said, you're connecting this for all wildlife. An overpass is absolutely the best solution. When you do a tunnel, some animals won't use a tunnel, and you can't connect an ecosystem. You don't get the green space. Obviously, you can't grow things in a long dark tunnel. So this is the best solution to connect for all wildlife, including mountain lions. But the other reason it got ruled out is it looked, when Caltrans scoped it out as part of the feasibility study, it actually looked like it'd be more expensive. And the reason is, again, this site is just so unique. You can't drill a tunnel under the 101. You would have to do what they call a cut and cover, which is you would actually have to cut open the 101, lower a mold. And I can tell you, we get widespread support for this crossing. If I shut down the 101 freeway, I think it would not get supported at all. So it actually was panning out to be more expensive. But the best ecological solution that the experts agreed on was an overpass. But anyway, back to Santa Cruz is looking at putting some underpasses for their mountain lions. Winston Vickers, again, down in Santa Ana's, they are not as far along, but they've at least, started some preliminary thoughts for siting. Coyote Valley, a lot of you have seen the viral video that went with the badger and the coyote and how they use that little tunnel. Friends of mine with the agencies up there are looking at wildlife crossings for Coyote Valley and other areas. And then another 17 project just got $5 million from the Wildlife Conservation Board to start their planning process, which is pretty exciting. So there's some crossings up in 89, Sonoma. Like, people are looking at these all over the state now, and they're in various forms. One of the more exciting ones I'm excited about, I just did a talk for the Eastern Sierra Land Trust, and they're in Mammoth Lakes, and the Caltrans was part of that talk, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They have a wildlife crossing that they actually have cited. They know the different possibilities and the price ranges, and they asked me to come talk about Liberty. And then at the second half, they talked about their crossing to sort of try to build some support and excitement. And that's a fascinating one. I told them I'd help once Liberty's done. A, it's in my beloved Sierra. B, it's a migration route. A lot of these wildlife corridors, Liberty included, these aren't historic migration routes. This is just what the wildlife have left. And we don't have a lot of ungulate migrations like you see, like Path of the Pronghorn or elk migrations in California. But we do have mule deer migrations in areas, and the Sierra is one of them. And this wildlife crossing, although it'll benefit, again, a variety of wildlife, it is helping with a lot of deer getting hit by by cars and their annual migration. So this one I'm really excited about, and they are, again, looking at, they need the planning dollars to get through that environmental process. So a lot going on across the state, and I'm excited. And I think that's one of the things I like about Liberty is it's showing what's possible, and it is getting a lot of these projects across the state and across the country unstuck, because now wildlife crossings, this is sort of an inspirational project. So that is another great thing that you're all helping to support, is not just this project, but a lot of these other projects that wildlife crossings have become sort of people are more familiar with them. We're going to see more. So.
Is part of the budget to include maintenance after the bridge is built? Dana Ross has asked.
So you want to thank Caltrans, because we did not have to fundraise for that. They agreed to assume in perpetuity responsibility for maintaining the crossing. So that's a big deal. However, part of our fundraising does include $1 million plus endowment for the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy /MRCA, because they will be responsible for the landscape on top. We don't require, not going to require, it's going to be native plants. It's not like you're going to be up there watering, but so that is part of our fundraising efforts to make sure they have an endowment for that, as well as I mentioned before, $1 million plus endowment for the National Park Service, so that their research is fully funded every year.
How long is this going to take to get it up and built and fully functional?
Yeah, so part of what it's looking like now is it's going to be phased. That's new too, again, as part of this design. One of the things we have to do that, again, was not, as we're evolving the design, we have to relocate some utilities, and that's going to take a little longer. It looks like we are going to underground them, which is nice for fire safety. But you have some, you can't see it here because they're undergrounded, but there's some utilities in between the 101 and the 405. I mean, sorry, the 101 and Agoura Road. So the way Caltrans is going to do this to allow for that is we're going to phase it. So the first phase is going to be the 101. And then about halfway between that structure being built, the Agoura will start. We think it's going to take about 3.5 years for everything to be finished. Maybe a little, it depends on how quickly that utility, whatever we end up doing there. Nothing's final yet until the final design's released, but that's at least what they're looking at now. So 3.5 years to finish everything, but it's phased. Like while they're working on the Agoura section, they'll start propagating or planting the 101 section. So that's going to be ready to go once it's finished.
Beth, it looks like there's a question here about just communicating to motorists as they're passing under what's going on above them. Is there any plans for any type of signage?
Absolutely. We're looking at a lot of creative approaches. We want people to know this is something special. Obviously, we can't do anything dangerous, but we're looking at what other folks have done, like with signage leading up to it. We're looking at what hasn't been done before, such as push notifications. Hey, you're driving under a wildlife crossing. Did you know that? So there's a lot we are looking at as far as the education around it, because we do want people to know this is something special. Yeah. As I told you, those other wildlife crossings are in remote areas. You get, again, 10,000 motorists a day. A lot of these crossings get way less than that. I visited a wildlife crossing in Idaho that, they got 10,000 cars a year. I was like, whoa, that's not a well-traveled road. So I think, again, this is the potential for Liberty to educate 300 to 400,000 people a day on what a wildlife crossing is. So we're looking at a lot of creative education and outreach around this. On Waze, right? If you're getting directions on Waze or Google Maps, how can we incorporate some cool technological solutions? We're looking at an app you can download to learn more about the Liberty Canyon Wildlife Crossing that would show you, images that have been picked up of wildlife crossing there. So absolutely, we want this to be used as an inspirational and educational tool, and motorists know that they're driving under something special. It's not just a bridge.
Yeah, an app would be cool to update the construction as it's going on, and then if there are wildlife cameras, maybe show some of the wildlife crossing once it's finally built.
Yeah, I'm excited. Cool. We're gonna have a one of those, what do you call them? You can do it on your iPhone now. Time-lapse cameras on, all through construction. So, and my friend who knows about this, who's going to do it, assures me he can, 3 years of construction, he can get down to 2 minutes. I'm like, really? That's amazing. But yeah, obviously there's wildlife cameras in the site now that the Park Service is monitoring for baseline and have been for a while. Obviously, we're going to have wildlife cameras on this once it's up. This is going to be a very heavily monitored and studied site, which is exciting.
Here's one last question that came in. Why does it need to be so substantial? In Canada, they have simple crossings.
Yeah, so again, it gets back to every crossing's different. The sites are different. Canada, again, you have less, the road is not as big.
Right.
So that's one thing. You don't have the sound and light that we're having to mitigate for. And as I've told you, we have Tony Clevenger and other folks who worked on those Banff crossings. And another thing that's pretty interesting to me is even Tony's like, well, here's what I did in Banff that I wouldn't have done now. I have 20 years in building these things. So we're actually benefiting from the Banff, the people who built the Banff crossings. And again, it's just a different, it's different considerations, much bigger road, urban area with light, sound, all that, different, in some respects, a different goal. Again, they were not looking at genetic isolation. They were looking at roadkill. So a lot of factors went into why this crossing is different from others. But again, these are people who build crossings for a living telling us this. It's every step of the way. Just to outline, the National Park Service and the Nature Conservancy hosted early on Tony and other experts coming out. I think it was like 2014, 2015, to take a first look. All right, what do we need to do here? What does it need to be? We then hosted a design workshop once Caltrans was done with 30% design as part of the environmental documents, bringing in these same experts to comment on the 30% and what we needed to do. And then as a result of that, we're like, you know what, we need this every step of the way. So again, these are the best minds on what it's going to take to get animals across this road here.
Very cool. Well, the sand has run out of the proverbial hourglass. And
can I answer one more question? Because this is an important one. Is it okay? It'll be quick.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they asked about how many more years do we estimate P22 will live?
Yes.
Yeah, we got to answer that one. And I get asked this a lot, and I got asked this again by some school children. So mountain lions in the wild, 10 to 13 is pretty, getting up there, pretty much the end of their lives. But in captivity, so mountain lions like in rescues or in zoos, 25, 30 is not unheard of. So P22 is not in captivity. I mean, he's a wild animal, but he's not facing some of the same stressors a male wild mountain lion is, which is he doesn't have to defend his territory. The reason he still looks so pretty, if you compare a photo of a male his age, usually they're scarred up like a tomcat because they've had to constantly defend their territory, or get pushed out, or don't make it. So that's an awful lot of stress. So I think he's going to live longer. If I had to guess, 15. I think he's gonna definitely push a little, because he's not in a captivity, but he's not exactly having to defend his territory all the time, which takes a lot of energy. So let's hope he's going to live on the high end, because he's 10, 11. That it worries a lot of us. So anyway, I had to answer that one.
But I imagine that his life expectancy could also be related to the deer population in Griffith Park.
Yeah, I mean, listen, catching deer is not easy for a mountain lion. It's not an easy go, but he does. Yeah, one of the reasons he's been able to survive in such a small territory, this is something that I love to just contemplate, because it's what I love about LA. So, Griffith Park has a deer population that is artificially, what it should be if it was the native landscape, because you have all these rich gardens around it and that they can eat, and you have forest lawn cemetery that deer can graze on. So there's something pretty incredible to me about this story, that the reason P22 can stay there is because of a cemetery where celebrities are buried, and that the deer are able to sustain themselves because of that artificial lawn, or because of celebrities' gardens who live around LA. Brad Pitt lives around Griffith Park, so we can thank Brad Pitt, and I call P22 the Brad Pitt of the mountain lion world. We can thank him and other celebrities for having such great gardens that keep the deer alive, that keep P22 alive. So yeah, the deer, it looks like, nobody knows for sure because we don't have a count, but so far so good. He's had plenty of deer to keep him alive.
Very cool. Well, while we have been talking, we have been getting quite a few compliments coming in through the chat line. And so I just want to reiterate that you've done a fabulous job here. This is really a wonderful presentation, because it's so not just timely, but it relates so closely to where we live.
Right.
So thank you so much, Beth. I think crossings are you, maybe one of your last a label for you as you go forth in your career. This has really been terrific.
Well, cool. And if I didn't get to your question, please, there's my email, my phone number. If I can't answer it, I will get you the answer. We want people to have the best information about this crossing and what it's going to do. A shout out to, I see a couple names like Sherry, one of our dedicated volunteers. We couldn't do this without volunteers. We couldn't do it. It takes a big village. Although I named the 5 primary partners, it takes a village, and you, Jerry and Brendan, and your organization have been part of that village that's going to make this. My boss, our CEO, our president of National Wildlife Federation, 6 million supporters nationwide. He called this, I love it's a planetary precedent. It is. No, I mean, it's just never been done before this way. And so thank all of you for being a part of that. And, it gets down to, we're not going to let these mountain lions go extinct on our watch. So thank you all for not letting that happen.
Well, thank you. I hope at some point we get to meet personally.
Yeah,
once the
soon.
pandemic is...
Vaccines are coming soon.
Exactly. Again, thanks so much. This has been wonderful. We'll no doubt be staying in close touch as this progresses, and we know how to get in touch with you if other questions arise. But stay well, stay safe, and stay in touch. So long, everyone. Good night.